Time for our class to begin. If you have your Bibles, turn to Job. We're in the midst of the study. We began with the introductory lesson last Lord's Day. And so we begin lesson 2, which we cover the first 2 chapters of this particular book. And we kind of went into some general areas last week, which we will kind of repeat in detail this week. So we're kind of reinforcing what we saw in the introductory lesson. But Job is a book in which there are blessings in suffering. And Job didn't realize that at first. And at the end, I hope he does by faith. But there's a lesson that we can learn from the book of Job as well in our suffering, that it is something that is going to happen to all of us, and especially a Christian, because we Christians, if we live godly, what will we suffer? Persecution. May not be death, but it may be somebody doesn't like you anymore. Somebody says something bad about you. Those things still hurt. And so we can learn lessons from Job. I think that's why it's here. Job, was he before Satan? Was he created before Satan? Satan's is in this first chapter. Satan has already done his thing. Is he a snake anymore in the Garden of Eden? Or was that really not a snake? Could it be a real snake? And Satan, as one who has left God, is involved in doing that which is evil? And this first chapter, tell me one thing that's good about Satan. What is one thing he says good about Job? What is one thing he says good about God? He is a liar and he is a murderer from the beginning. He's in place. Job comes along. Job is offering sacrifices in this first chapter, but it wasn't according to the law of Moses. And so we put him in the time of the patriarchs, where the fathers would take the lead of their families, and that fits very well at this particular time. It's in the day of the patriarchs. They're the leaders. God is working through the patriarchs to communicate his word and to communicate his will. So we want to begin by looking at the idea that was with Job, what's his character like? We've already realized he lived in the land of Uz, which is in the region that we would know as in our Bibles, in our atlases, near Edom. And we'll look at a map of that in just a few moments. But what do we see here about his character? And how he lived before men and before God. What is it? David? Blameless. Mine says perfect. So how is blameless and perfect brought together, where both of those terms are accurate? Yes. It doesn't mean they're sinless, but in their walk before God, they're without blame as they stand before men. They're blameless, and what would other also men understand by just looking at him? He is upright. Isn't that correct? When you're upright, you're not just standing upright, but you're walking straight. You're upright. You're doing things that are honorable. So in the idea of man, and God will recognize this too, because he realizes this is the truth about him. But he's a perfect man. When you look at him, he's blameless. Not a lot of things you're going to say about him. You can't. He's upright with his dealings with man. What's his character before God? He's fearful. Phobia, I don't want to be close to God. I'm running away from God. No. He's reverencing him, isn't he? There's a sense, I know God exists. I'm not realizing, is there any reality out there? Yeah, there is. It's God. He already has that figured out. You and I should have it figured out. But there is a God. We start there, and there's nothing out of ordinary. There's nothing out of character of who God is and how powerful he is that we say he doesn't exist. There's no reality out there. That's where modern man is. But where are we? We're created in the image of God, and God has communicated to us and his word. And what he says, here is a God-fearing man. I don't know if he's God-fearing or not when I look at him, But I sure do see him being blameless. There's not a thing I can say about him. He seems to be just and upright in all the things that he's doing. Well, God says he's reverencing God. He fears God. And what does he do before God that God's pleased with? He sees, and he's pleased with us when we do it. He turns away from what? Apparently evil's in the world when Job lived. He didn't live that long back before evil was there. Satan is in place. Evil is in place. Following God's in place, and suffering is in place. And Job is the great example of a good, righteous, upright, moral man that is suffering. And he does not know why. He does not know why. And so we are introduced to him in this particular way of how his character is such that is worthy of note at the very beginning, because he's the one that's going to suffer. How blessed was Job? How blessed was Job? If you want to look at his blessings, how many children did he have? 10. Divide them up for me by male and female. 7 sons, 3 daughters. And that makes 10. That's kind of, well, symbolically, that would be a complete number. And you say, well, it's not 5 and 5. It's not equal yet. Maybe Job will get there one day. Maybe the 21st century we'd have 5 and 5. Because we want equality, don't we? We don't want anybody to have an edge on anybody else. We bring everybody down to the same common denominator. But there's 7 sons and 3 daughters. Can life exist today without the sperm of a male? Yeah, that's deteriorating, you know. Man might be on the way of extinction because that's deteriorating a little bit every year. It's happening. And so what will females be like when there's no males? They may not be here. And man will cease to exist. But God's made us. We're distinct, male and female. These are sons and daughters. Well, you can be blessed in other ways, can't you? By the world. Would you be possessed by your what? Possessions. Tell me how rich and how blessed he was in his possessions. All right, because he had a lot of servants. Did he have a lot of servants? He did that. But how else is he blessed? How many sheep did he have? That's too many for me. I don't know what to do with them. You call that a blessing? How many camels? You got 3,000 of them. Count the humps. But that was the way of getting around out in the wilderness in the days. They were very special. How many oxen? I didn't ask you that. How many oxen? 500 yoke, and I think that would be 1,000. Because what do we find them doing in this first chapter in verse 14? The oxen were plowing. How were they plowing? By a yoke. I would think there are about 1,000 of those individual oxen. How many female donkeys? You got 500 of those. Didn't say 500 yoke, but yoke would mean they're pairs. And why is that? Because we're plowing. What are you plowing? Sheep? Goats? Camels? Animals? What are you plowing? What's the goal? I'm going to have grain. I'm going to have maybe vineyards because we're going to be drinking wine in the first chapter. So we're seeing his blessings out here. In the wilderness, it's close by because there will be a great wind come from the where? And look at our map. It'll come from the wilderness. Why would camels be something of a blessing? Because they'll be traveling across desert lands. There is richness of the ground. That's why they're plowing with the oxen. There is indeed the animals that were sheep that would bring forth value, because you could shear them without killing them, but you could kill them and eat them. That man is blessed. He has a wife, he has 10 children, he has possessions that from the worldly standpoint at that time, that is a man of great possessions. And you might not think that way. How much did he have in his 401k? How much did he have in his savings account? How much property did he own? I'll tell you how many camels he had. Beat that. What kind of garage would you have to have for that one? David? No, you had to answer that, but what do you have?
A black cow would be someone's net worth now. Someone's net worth back then would have definitely been computed by how much livestock and other things like that they were. And that's something we have to put ourselves back in there.
That's right.
We didn't have a stock market or all these other means of accumulating.
And probably not a lot of supermarkets either, huh? He had to have his food. So we see very well he's indeed a blessed man, and one that had great possessions. And as has already been set forth, he had what we call servants that were involved, that he was the greatest of all the children of the East, because he had a very great household, and he was the greatest of all the children of the East. Where have we located us? To the east, especially from the land of Canaan, in that eastern part where we find that here are these enemies that come up upon Job, and they're from these areas, from the south and from the north, the Chaldeans from the north, the Euphrates, and also from people from Sheba behind that bush there. They're coming up. So there's where his character is. Can you be rich and be godly? Can you have great possessions that stands up among all the men of the East and be a man that stands out in character? Job's example. We've already seen where he's looked upon as a righteousness like maybe Noah, maybe Daniel. He compares with them in Scripture. And so we see what a great man he was. What did he continually do for his children? He got up early to do this, and he continually did so. What was he worried about? Sins of his sons. He had 3 daughters. But what were they doing kind of continually, periodically? What were they doing? On the particular child's day, they had their day. I wonder what day that would be in your world. It's his day. It's her day. What day is that? Maybe my birthday. It's all about you. Where do you want to go eat today? It's all about you. It's your day. And it was, each one had their day, and they would meet. The girls would come. The daughters of Job would come, meet with their brothers on their particular day, and they would feast. And what do we see happening on the day that they are all eliminated and destroyed from the face of this earth? What are they doing together? Because in chapter 1, we see that indeed they were be together as they were feasting in the same house. The 3 sisters with them, they would eat and drink with them. Verse 4. We're on this horrible day in the life of Job and his family. What were they doing? They were feasting, weren't they? That's right. Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their elder brother's house. Here we have drinking wine in their elder brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind in the wilderness. It smote the 4 corners of the house. Maybe that's not a tent. Maybe there is something established there that we would call a house, 4 corners of the house. It fell upon them, so it collapsed. And it fell upon who? The young men. And they are dead, and I only am escaped along to tell thee. So let's assume the witness is telling the truth. And he is, or she is. What happened to the girls on that day? Yes? I think that's true. But if I didn't know Hebrew, I just have my text in English, I would then see from the context that we're observing that no one survived. Wouldn't they may have survived? Would they go tell their daddy about what happened? I think that would be a logical thing. And at the end in chapter 42, we see that he was blessed with 7 sons and how many daughters? He had 3 daughters. And that's what he had. Well, add that to the 3 that survived this particular event. You have 6. There's still 3 daughters. Again, you're looking at headship. You're looking at men, head of their homes, of the male. And these were sisters. Don't know, were any of them married? We don't know. We think that would happen. But we don't know that. They were always invited to be with their brothers, their family. There's the household. And he was continually offering up sacrifices because he feared that his sons, that word, his sons would be would dishonor God in their hearts. If we look at the point about if it's emphasis upon sons, we see like Vashti's time, the men were separated from the women and they were doing all the drinking. But the girls here are drinking wine with them. So we look at this word yayin, wine, in the Hebrew. And we take a little detour and realize, how would you describe the wine, the word yayin, in the Bible? Is it something that is grape juice? It is the juice of the grape. Could we say that? Would someone read Isaiah 65 and verse 8? David, you shook your head yes, and I agree with you. But go to Isaiah 65 and in verse 8. And what does that say about yayin, which is called wine?
Thus says the Lord, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one says, do not destroy it, for blessed is it, so will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all.
All right. Don't destroy that grape, but here's wine. Don't destroy the wine. There's a blessing in it. We're looking at the fresh juice of the grape. So sometimes we'll have the term new wine, which would be grape juice. But is it always grape juice? Job 32 and in verse 19. Corey, do you have that? Would you read that for me, please? Because this is Elihu. This is in our book of Job. What do you think wine means here in verse 19? Read it first.
Indeed, my belly is like that wine that has no vent. It's ready to burst like new wineskins.
Okay, like new wineskins, they're ready to burst. And my inward self is as wine which hath no vent. So what's about to happen? What is happening? What process is happening with wine? It's fermenting. Same word, but it's fermenting. We first read in Genesis 9:21, Noah, he was one that grew grapes, and he was drunken with wine that he exposed his nakedness. Think he was a little drunk? There's wine. In chapter 19, the daughters of Lot, let's let him drink wine, and we will lie with him, have sex with him. His inhibitions are down while he drank wine. But Leviticus 10:4, you have God through Moses commanding Aaron and his sons not to drink wine, period. Why? You've got to tell the difference between the common and the clean and the pure. and being affected by wine that can ferment and the alcohol content, it can make you not be able to do that. So what was a Levite to do? We're not going to touch it. We're not going to touch it. And the Proverbs is full of wisdom, how we ought to react to wine. What I'm saying is, context will determine if that's fermented or not fermented wine. And when Jesus turned the water to wine, so here's wine, there's some more work to be done with Jesus after they have well saturated themselves with wine. Would he made gallons and gallons and gallons of more for them to really get bombed that day at the party? Is that the character of God? Or could that be the taste of that, even after their taste buds have been saturated with the wine? They said, this is good. Could be the pure juice of the grape. Does Jesus not have the power to do that? Where would he? Is he a stumbling block to people in situations like that? That's not Jesus that we see in his character. And the possibility, it can be fresh grape juice. But it also can be fermented and cause people to be drunk. What's Job Spears? What's Job Spears? It may be on these days of fast feasting, my sons will have cursed God where? In their heart. And I fear that. Because that's the effects. One, we need to realize it took them a lot of wine to get drunk. That's why it's equated with gluttony in Proverbs when he says, don't look at it. Don't become drunken with wine. And the sugar content of the grape in those days was not, even at its fullest power, would never be over 3 to 5% alcohol. It never was going to do that. You would have strong drink that would be brought in, but there were no places where let's just go brew some beer, that sort of thing. It was the natural fermentation. They had ways of keeping it fermented, of keeping it fresh. And sometimes in the wineskins, it would become, air would connect with it and fermentation would start. And Elihu says, my heart is like my bowels, or my heart is like there's no vent. It's fermentation, it's about to burst. We get the picture. And so I think it's a fair statement to say that Yahweh can be fermented wine, and the smartness is stay away from it. Or it can be the juice of the grape. It's in the cluster of the grape. It's not fermented yet. It's in the cluster of the grape. And it's called a blessing. And we can see the importance of that. And then we can have our discussion, is God pleased with social drinking today? And how should the Christian react to that? This will be a foundation. But how God says that, and what's Timothy doing in his day as a Christian? He was staying away from it how? Completely. I wonder why. Because it was a wise thing to do, because we knew the dangers of things like that. I said, take a little for your stomach's sake. Maybe a little NyQuil. It's not simple. But I'm going out to social drinking. I'm not down in NyQuil. We're having wine. We're having beer. We're having those things. And we have to realize, what kind of character am I supposed to be in serving the Lord? I think it's pretty clear from God's wisdom. Without saying, Yahweh is the juice of the grape. In Isaiah 65 and verse 8, it's my passage. I've got passages too that says we got some more work to do, to be fair. David, you had your hand up? Yes. And you were like barbarian, you're not sophisticated. Yeah. That's a good point. But this is not our class. We're about Job. But can you see why Job might worry about something? And I think it becomes very important. Who were the sons of God presenting themselves before Jehovah? Sons of God meet, and it seemed like they meet periodically. What were they doing? What are they doing here? They're kind of presenting themselves before whom? Before God. And so Satan is with them. And so they present themselves before Jehovah in verse 6, and Satan was also among them. So we're trying to, well, who are the sons of God? We're sons of God. We're Christians. We're children of God. This is for Christianity. And we got to realize, well, what does sons of God mean? Those are the Israelites. Well, children of God, children of Israel, sons of God, God's people. You have a point there. But what do we read in Job, the 38th chapter, when God speaks to Job and he begins to talk some sense to him and sense of who he is and who God is? And he asked Job a question. Forget Job to be thinking, where were you? In essence, I'm paraphrasing, where were you when I created the world? Where were you? When I laid the foundation of the earth? Where were you, Job? You got things figured out. By this time, he's already maybe charged God unfairly. And he needed to understand, you've got to trust me. And that's what God is having us do. But where were you when I did all of this? Who determined the measures thereof in verse 5? If thou knowest, tell me. How come it's that large and that small? Wherein were the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? Like we're going to start our building now. And then what do you read in verse 7? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Oh, Adam and Eve weren't here yet. Sons of God aren't here yet like we think they are. Who else could be sons of God? Context here tells you who. Angelic host, right? And you can't deny that. The morning stars sang together. It's imagery there. And the sons of God shouted for joy. The angelic host were singing for joy. Those who understand who God is. They were shouting for joy. So here is that spiritual world that the book of Job opens to us. Satan is in the heavenly places. That's why in Ephesians we read where the evil works of darkness and the leader of the darkness, they're in the heavenly places. You know, that's heaven. No, it's not. It's the spiritual. Context will determine it. There is a place called heaven where only the righteous will come. But in that spiritual world, that which, I don't know how close it is to us right now, and we're in our world, and we take for reality, but reality is that in the unseen realm, there's hosts, myriads of angels. And God helps us know that from time to time. And as we read the book of Job, we see this is happening. Satan is presenting himself. And let me just start when we see Satan. What's another name for Satan in our Bibles? We know his character. He's a liar and a murderer. But what's his name? How do we identify him by name? What's another name for Satan? The devil. What's the distinction of those two words by definition? Since there are two names, could there be two distinctions that are harmonized together to understand who he is? I think I want to do that. I want to do that this morning. Satan is our what? Adversary. He's our adversary. The devil is our accuser. See how he can lie and be the devil? See how he could be against anything that's good on my behalf? The adversary. He's the devil. Revelation brings the two together. Satan, devil, the serpent. And he's the deceiver of the whole world. Revelation 12:9. Deceiver of the whole world. It's all deception about him. And what do you learn here that says, Satan is not just a force. Evil is not just a force. Satan is not just a word to denote a force that's just permeating out there in the world. It has no identity at all. What do you learn about Satan's makeup? He's a spiritual creature. And I think he's a created creature, and he fell from serving God, and he's out to destroy the things of God. But who does he meet periodically to answer to? God, Jehovah. And it's just read the interesting dialogue when he says, Jehovah said unto Satan, whence comes thou? Then Satan answered Jehovah and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down to it. Pretty good for a snake, isn't it? Takes the form of a real snake, maybe at a time when snakes were upright, but he's a spiritual creature. And he's walking to and fro, not just here in Uz, but he's walking to and fro in all the earth. And God said, where are you coming from today? He's having to answer that. And then Jehovah says, hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in all the earth. Oh, we've already cut this. God says this about Job, a perfect and upright man, feareth God and turneth away from all evil. Yeah, that's what he is. And God reminds Satan that's who he is. He says, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou made a hedge about his house? Verse 11, put forth thy hand now and touch all that he hath, and he'll renounce thee to thy face. How does Satan communicate with Jehovah? Language. That's not necessarily English, not necessarily Hebrew, but they're communicating. And words form ideas. How do you know he's walking to and fro in all the earth? He said so. What do you mean? You've got a hedge about him. What does that word mean? In their language, one with another, what does hedge mean to us? How are we going to understand the communication between two spiritual beings, one God and one Satan? How do we understand you build a hedge about yourself? How are we going to understand that? How does God want us to understand that? What does it mean, a hedge around him? All around him, by the way. There's no little opening there. What does that mean? God is protecting you all the time. You take that out of the way, and what will he do? He'll renounce you, Jehovah, to your face. Can Satan think? Can he reason? Can he act? All three. And he can move. And he can be a lot of places. And what we see is that there is the personality that we read about Satan. He's not just a force. He has identity by thinking, reasoning. I reasoned that if you took that protection around him, and we know it as a hedge, and how do we know that we know? Language. And God has communicated what took place in that meeting for us to understand. But Satan's talking. He's presenting himself before Jehovah. It seems like somebody's in authority here. And who's the chairman? of the board. Even God is, even with Satan in the midst. And so does he have the power to act? In verse 12, Jehovah said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put forth not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah. He moved, he acted, and he's about to do what God allowed him to do. Is that unfair to you, to think that about God? And what we begin to realize, that that's the occasion, presented themselves before him. What did Satan accuse Job of in regards of his piety toward God? Yeah, you've told me, God, how upright he is and he fears you and all that. But I tell you, he'll renounce you to your face if you take that protective around him. You let me touch him. And what does God do? He allowed Satan to touch him.
Except you
Couldn't kill him. Wait till the next meeting. We'll talk about that one. But he couldn't kill him. Now let me just pause. I know our time is short. This is a great lesson on suffering. That he's about to suffer. We know he's about to lose his possessions, lose his children, and before chapter 2 ends, he loses his health. And let's just put ourselves here. What lesson can we learn? Okay. We're going to suffer. God allows it. But it's how we react to it that becomes important. Can we react to it? Well, God has done this to me. I can say yes. I also say no. I can say yes because what did he do? Is your God is he not strong enough to stop something that he didn't will to happen? Well, it's not his will. That's true. We have to be drawing some lines here. But the bottom line is, God, you have the power to do anything you want to do and be right. Wouldn't it be right to tell Satan, you're not going to touch him at all? And we wouldn't probably have the rest of Job because suffering wouldn't happen. But let's say God not only allows that, but let's just say God does it because he's testing us. Every time it happens. I'm studying Ruth and learned this week how Naomi reacted to her calamities. And she was bitter. God struck me. God's done this to me. You know why she can say that and be a person of God's? Is that I create evil, God says. I can do it all. I can bring evil upon you. Well, no, God, you didn't do that. Yes, I did. How did I do it with Job? I allowed Satan. See, I don't have to run away from God. But what I need to do, how am I going to react? Because every one of us, we're going to suffer in this life. Some of you have already done that, and some of you said, I'm through that, and you're going to suffer some more. That's our time here. God has put that in place. What's that about? It's to test us. It's to test us how we react. And what does God help Job to understand? I'll tell you, Job, this is why you're suffering. He didn't say that. He said, do what? Trust me. Not blaspheme me, or not try to avoid me. Learn from it. And adversity, consider. The Bible harmonizes all the way through. That's a testing time. How will I react? Because we all suffer. And what's the final end of us? It's always good. It's always good. Now, if you have that in your mind, and the sermon tonight will nail down, it's always good. If it works out the way I want it to work out. But I think that's so needed today. COVID. Thank you. We'll have time to start there. But COVID is a test. Did God allow that? Sure did. And he tests us how we react. Will we be bitter like Naomi? Or will we be like Job, who realizes, God, I will take on what you say. Shall I accept good and not evil? I'll take it all. And we learn from that, knowing that in the end, we're all victorious. This life is just a test. And when I see it that way, I can deal with whatever suffering comes my way and realize this is an opportunity, God, for me to show the type of man I am. And have a godly attitude toward it and accept it. It's from you. It's from you. Who did God allow it to happen? He didn't will to do this to Job. After all, it looks like a hedge is around Job. Job's been blessed. But when the time of testing comes, he allows it. And he says, every one of us, if we live godly, will suffer persecution. So we'll just stop there. And next week, Lord willing, we'll continue with question number 6. What 2 calamities hit them? We're summing up what those 2 are. So if you begin working on that, that'd be great. Any questions before we really close? Okay, thank you.